Good evening, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Indian Express Group, a very warm welcome to the Indian Express Think session on climate change and economy presented by Swaniti Initiative. This edition focuses on Chhattisgarh. IE Think is a thought-provoking forum that brings together thought leaders, policy makers, and corporate leaders to encourage a substantive exchange of ideas and with the best minds to give it direction and solutions. We will begin today's session with a conversation, which will be followed by a panel discussion. For the conversation, we have with us our chief guest, Bhupesh Baghel, Chief Minister of Chhattisgarh, with Amitabh Sinha, Deputy Editor, The Indian Express. I now hand this over to Amitabh.
Joining us in today's conversation is Chief Minister of Chhattisgarh, Mr. Bhupesh Baghel. आपका स्वागत है भूपेश बघेल जी. Thank you for joining in. सबसे पहले तो मैं ये जानना चाहूँगा कि ये जो क्लाइमेट चेंज से रिलेटेड इंटरनेशनल लेवल पे सबने एक टारगेट ले रखा है, सब लोगों ने अपना ये प्लान बना रखा है कि हम क्या करने जा रहे हैं, और अभी के जो प्लान्स हैं उसके हिसाब से ये बड़ा क्लियर दिखता है कि अगर इन सारे प्लान्स का कार्यान्वयन भी हो जाए तो 2 डिग्री की जो टारगेट है वो तो नहीं पूरी होने वाली, 1.5 डिग्री की तो बिल्कुल भी नहीं होगी, लेकिन 2 डिग्री भी शायद हम अवॉइड नहीं कर सकेंगे. तो ऐसे में जरूरत है कि मतलब एक्शंस जो अनाउंस्ड हैं उससे ज्यादा एक्शन लिया जाए, और ये इसमें स्टेट्स की भूमिका होगी, इसमें सिटी गवर्नमेंट्स की भूमिका होगी, कम्युनिटीज, बिजनेसेस, तो सबको थोड़ा सा इसमें जोर लगाना होगा. तो ऐसे में जो ये जरूरी है कि आपके जैसे स्टेट्स जो कि बहुत काफी इम्पोर्टेंट भी हैं क्लाइमेट चेंज पर्सपेक्टिव से, कि छत्तीसगढ़ जो है सो इसमें एक पहल ले. तो हम वो थोड़ा जानना चाहेंगे कि छत्तीसगढ़ में क्लाइमेट चेंज से रिलेटेड क्या क्या कदम उठाए जा रहे हैं जो कि हमारे नेशनल जो टारगेट्स हैं उसको मीट करेंगे या उससे आगे भी जाएंगे.
देखिए, सबसे पहली बात तो ये जानना जरूरी है कि ये क्लाइमेट चेंज क्यों हो रहा है, और उसके कारण को जानकर ही उसके निदान की तरफ हम लोगों को आगे बढ़ना होगा.
जी.
तो सबसे पहली बात तो ये कि जनसंख्या, और जनसंख्या के साथ साथ आज जो आधुनिक युग है उसमें हमारी जो आवश्यकताएं हैं
जी.
और उन आवश्यकताओं को पूर्ति के लिए जितना हम लोग चाहे मशीनीकरण कर रहे हैं, चाहे वाहन की बात हो, चाहे बिजली के उत्पादन की बात हो, तो ये सारी चीजें हैं जो ये बताती है कि ये क्लाइमेट चेंज इस कारण से हुआ है.
जी.
अब उसमें तो डिटेल तो आपके पास है ही, उसे बताने की जरूरत नहीं, उन चीजों को गिराने की. अब रोकने की जहां तक की बात है तो सबसे पहली बात यह कि छत्तीसगढ़ राज्य की बात यदि करें
जी,
छत्तीसगढ़ 1,35,000 वर्ग किलोमीटर में फैला हुआ है और यहाँ की जनसंख्या 3 करोड़ से कम है. तो मैं समझता हूँ कि ये बहुत आदर्श स्थिति है छत्तीसगढ़ की. जनसंख्या के अनुपात में जो जमीन है
जी.
उसके हिसाब से करें तो हमारा अनुपात बहुत आदर्श स्थिति में है. दूसरी बात यह है कि इसके लिए यदि हम देखें तो हमारे छत्तीसगढ़ में 44% जंगल है
जी.
करीब 30,000 नदियां नाले हैं. तो अब इन जंगलों को बचाना ये हमारी पहली प्राथमिकता
जी.
तो ये है कि हमारे शासन सत्ता में आने के बाद ये पहले 42% था, 42-43% के आसपास था, और 1% हमारी वृद्धि हुई जंगलों में.
जी.
दूसरी बात यह है कि इसमें वृक्षारोपण के लिए हम लोगों ने विशेष प्रयास किया है, जिसमें वृक्ष की खेती को भी हम लोगों ने राजीव गांधी किसान न्याय योजना से जोड़ा है.
जी.
जो व्यक्तिगत रूप से अपने खेत में यदि वृक्षारोपण करते हैं तो 3 साल तक के प्रति एकड़ 9,000 रुपये हम देंगे उनको.
जी.
उनको पौधे तो उपलब्ध कराएंगे ही, लेकिन उसको इनपुट सब्सिडी भी दे रहे हैं.
अच्छा.
इसी साल वृक्ष संपदा योजना हम लोग, मुख्यमंत्री वृक्ष संपदा योजना हम लोगों ने शुरू किया है, और उसमें लगभग इस साल तो 36,000 हेक्टेयर में वृक्ष लगाने का हमने टारगेट किया है. दूसरा जो पंचायत है, पंचायतों में भी यदि शासकीय भूमि है और उसमें वृक्षारोपण करते हैं तो पंचायत को भी 9,000 रुपये प्रति एकड़ के हिसाब से उनको इनपुट सब्सिडी मिलेगी.
जी
तो हमने वृक्षारोपण को बढ़ावा देने का काम किया है। दूसरा, जो फॉरेस्ट राइट एक्ट के तहत पट्टा जिनको मिला है उन किसानों को,
जी
तो उनके मनरेगा के तहत उनके खेतों में वृक्षों के लिए गड्ढा खोदना है, फॉरेस्ट डिपार्टमेंट के तरफ से वृक्ष रोपण लगाने का, फिर हम लोग फेंसिंग और उसके बाद पानी की व्यवस्था, तो ये सारी व्यवस्था हम लोगों ने किया है ताकि वो ज्यादा से ज्यादा पेड़ लगाए। शहरों में भी हम लोगों ने एक योजना बनाई है नगर पंचायत, नगर पालिका और नगर निगमों में, कि जो हमारे पास खाली पड़े भूखंड हैं तो कम से कम एक ऐसे भूखंड जिसमें हमारे जो पुराने पेड़ है और जिसमें पीपल है, बरगद है, नीम है, इमली है, तो ऐसे जो पुराने हमारे पेड़ हैं तो शहर के लोग उससे परिचित भी हों और पर्यावरण के लिए भी अच्छा हो। तो कृष्ण कुंज का हम लोगों ने उसका नाम दिया है और कृष्ण कुंज बनाने का फैसला किया है, जिसमें लगातार इसमें काम हो रहा है। पिछले साल हमने इससे शुरुआत की है।
जी
तो एक तरफ पेड़ लगाने का हम लोग लगातार प्रयास कर रहे हैं, लेकिन दूसरे तरफ जंगल को बचाना है। तो जंगल बचाने के लिए सबसे ज्यादा जरूरी क्या है? आज यदि मैं कहूँ कि छत्तीसगढ़ बने आज ये 2300 साल है,
जी
और इस 23 साल में जितने वन विभाग ने पेड़ लगाए और यदि वो बच जाते, मैं नहीं समझता कि छत्तीसगढ़ में जंगल इतना हो जाता है कि लगाने के लिए जमीन नहीं मिलती। लेकिन होता ये है कि पेड़ तो लगा देते हैं
जी
लेकिन बचता नहीं है।
हाँ
इसलिए हमने ये कहा है कि जो जहाँ पे पानी की उपलब्धता है
जी
वहां पे पेड़ लगाया जाए, और खासकर जो नदी के किनारे जो जमीन है, खाली पड़ी जमीन है जिसमें जमीन का कटाव भी होता है, तो उसमें हम लोग वृक्षारोपण हम लोगों ने कराया है। वो प्रोजेक्ट हमने हाथ में लिया है
जी
और ये तय करें कि हमारे जो पेड़ है, जो पेड़ लगा रहे हैं वो बचे भी।
जी
तो इस दिशा में हम लोगों ने फलदार वृक्ष लगाए। तो इसके कारण से हुआ क्या है कि जो वहाँ के निवास करने वाले, खासकर छत्तीसगढ़ में अभी देखें तो आदिवासी बहुल क्षेत्र है हमारा,
जी
जंगलों में मैक्सिमम हमारे आदिवासी रहते हैं, परंपरागत निवासी भी वहाँ
जी
लोग रहते हैं। तो लेकिन उनके आय के साधन पहले यही था, जो जंगल में जो फलदार वृक्ष थे जिसमें साल है, महुआ है, चिरौंजी है और तमाम प्रकार के फल हैं, जिससे उनको आय होती थी और उन पेड़ों को कोई काटता नहीं। अभी भी हिंदुस्तान में आप देख लें कि महुआ का पेड़ कोई लगाता नहीं, लेकिन कोई काटता भी नहीं। क्यों? कि महुआ उसे मिलता है, 4 पैसे आमदनी होती है।
जी
इसका अर्थ यह हुआ कि जो फलदार वृक्ष यदि लगाएं, चाहे आंवला लगाएं, इमली लगाएं, बिही लगाएं, जो भी पेड़ लगाएं, जामुन लगाएं, इन पेड़ों को कोई काटता नहीं है।
जी
तो यदि भारत सरकार भी ये निर्णय ले ले, हम लोगों ने भी इस प्रकार से निर्णय लिया, लगभग करीब 95 लाख पौधे पिछले वर्षों हमने फलदार वृक्षों को रोपा है, ताकि ये वृक्ष रहेंगे तो निश्चित रूप से जंगल तो हरा भरा होगा, ऑक्सीजन भी हमें मिलेगा। जो दूसरे इमारती पेड़ यदि लगाते हैं तब भी वही असर होगा जो फलदार वृक्ष लगाए। तो मैंने पहले बताया कि 30,000 हमारे यहाँ नाले हैं, 13,000 नाले हम लोगों ने वाटर रिचार्जिंग का काम किया है उसको, और उसमें करीब 1.25 करोड़ हमने स्ट्रक्चर, छोटे बड़े स्ट्रक्चर हमने खड़े किए हैं। उसमें बहुत बड़े बड़े स्ट्रक्चर हमने नहीं किया है, बल्कि वैज्ञानिक ढंग से जो हमारे पद्धति वन विभाग के भी हैं। आप पहले राजीव गांधी माइक्रो मैनेजमेंट इरिगेशन का आपने सुना होगा, तो उसी प्रकार से फॉरेस्ट के भी है, इरिगेशन की भी है। और हम लोगों को जो अनुभव है, मैं जब 2000 से 2003 के बीच में मेरे पास पीएचई विभाग था, तो मैंने यहाँ पानी के लिए 2 दिन का कार्यशाला आयोजित किया था, जिसमें अनुपम मिश्र जी वगैरह आए थे। बड़े बड़े जो जल के क्षेत्र में काम करने वाले लोग आए थे और 2 दिन तक के यहाँ कार्यशाला आयोजित हुआ था। और उसी समय मैंने निर्णय लिया था कि ये जो सैटेलाइट इमेज से जितने भी हमारे जमीन के नीचे जितने भी स्टेटा है उसको हम लोग ले लें और उसकी जानकारी हम लोग ले लें, तो वाटर रिचार्जिंग काम हम लोग ले सकते हैं। जहां जहां हम लोगों ने वाटर रिचार्जिंग काम किया है तो 7 सेंटीमीटर से लेके 70 सेंटीमीटर तक के वाटर रिचार्जिंग हुआ है।
अच्छा।
ऐसा फायदा ये हुआ है वाटर रिचार्जिंग वो प्रोजेक्ट लेने से, एक तरफ तो वहां के गांव के लोगों को पानी उपलब्धता, मान लो जो मार्च में जो नाला सूख जाता था, अभी मई तक के पानी आपको दिखाई देगा उन नालों में।
जी।
दूसरा फायदा ये है कि जो नाला के किनारे जितने भी पेड़ पौधे हैं उसको पानी मिल गया तो हरियाली बनी रहती है, तो
जी।
वहां चारा की व्यवस्था हो जाता है मवेशियों के लिए। तीसरी बात यह है कि जब हरा भरा रहता है तो उसमें फिर मेरा खुद का देखा हुआ अनुभव है, और उसमें मधुमक्खियां खूब आ जाती है, जहाँ फूल वगैरह खूब होते हैं, जब
जी।
हरियाली होगी तो फूल भी आएंगे, तो उसके कारण से मधुमक्खी भी हो जाता है,
जी।
मधुमक्खी जहाँ है, मधुरस जहाँ है, वो फिर भालू भी आएंगे।
जी।
तो इस प्रकार से इकोसिस्टम बैलेंस करने का एक बहुत बढ़िया तरीका है कि जंगल के नालों को हम वाटर रिचार्जिंग करें। लगभग 40,000 क्विंटल पराली हम लोगों ने दान में लिया, और उसके ट्रांसपोर्टिंग और खर्चे के लिए हमने कुछ पैसे दिए, और वो सब इकट्ठा कर दिए। तो एक तो पैरा जलाने से जो कार्बन उत्सर्जन होता था उसमें बड़ी कमी आ गई।
अच्छा।
और उस कार्बन को हमने वर्मी कंपोस्ट के रूप में उसको कन्वर्ट कर दिया। वर्मी कंपोस्ट यदि हम प्रयोग ला रहे हैं तो हमारे यहाँ अभी तक के करीब 28 लाख क्विंटल वर्मी कंपोस्ट हमने बनाया है।
अच्छा।
अभी हमारे पास वर्तमान में करीब 6 से 7 लाख क्विंटल हमारे पास अभी है। तो
जी।
बरसात में जैसे बरसात शुरू होगी तो फिर हम किसानों को वितरित करेंगे। तो
हाँ।
दूसरा हम इससे ये होगा कि हम जैविक खेती की तरफ बढ़ रहे हैं।
जी।
जो हमारे यूरिया, पोटास, डीएपी, सुपर फास्फेट जो लगता था उसके जगह वर्मी कंपोस्ट डालना शुरू किया, और उत्पादन में कोई अंतर नहीं आता, बल्कि जो अनाज है वो चमकदार भी है, स्वादिष्ट भी है, और शरीर के लिए फायदेमंद है, क्योंकि पेस्टिसाइड उपयोग कम होता है उससे। तो इस प्रकार से कार्बन उत्सर्जन हम रोकने की भी प्रयास कर रहे हैं, और उस कार्बन को हम खाद के रूप में परिणित करके फिर खेतों में डालने का काम कर रहे हैं।
मैं जंगलों के इससे जानना चाह रहा था कि हमारा नेशनल लेवल पे जंगल को लेकर एक क्लाइमेट टारगेट भी है, जो कि 2.5 to 3 बिलियन टन्स ऑफ एडिशनल कार्बन सिंक क्रिएट करने का जो हमने प्रॉमिस कर रखा है। स्टेट लेवल पे जंगलों के मार्फत क्या कोई एक गोल है कि हम क्या करना चाहते हैं? हम जंगलों को इतना बढ़ा, अभी 40-42% है, तो हम शायद उसको इतना, या जंगलों की क्वालिटी को बढ़ाने के लिए, या उसकी कार्बन एब्जॉर्प्शन कैपेसिटी जो है उसको बढ़ाने के लिए क्या कोई गोल सेटिंग हो रखा है उसके लिए?
देखिए अताब जी, एक चीज है,
जी।
पूरे देश को ये बात समझनी होगी
जी।
कि या तो हिमालय के तराई में ही जंगल बचे हैं,
जी।
इस बात से आप सहमत हैं,
बिल्कुल, या छत्तीसगढ़ में।
या दूसरा जो ये झारखंड है,
जी।
झारखंड, मध्य प्रदेश,
हाँ।
छत्तीसगढ़, उड़ीसा,
ऐसा। हाँ। वो
ये
बेट।
पट्टी है,
जी।
इसमें जंगल है।
जी।
बचत जो है वो छोटे छोटे पेच में होंगे जंगल, मैं
हाँ।
इनकार नहीं कर रहा हूं,
हाँ।
लेकिन
हाँ।
बड़े जंगल जो है वो यही हैं,
जी। बिल्कुल।
मध्य प्रदेश, झारखंड, छत्तीसगढ़, उड़ीसा,
बिल्कुल।
है ना। आज सीमावर्ती और राज्यों में भी हो सकता है,
हाँ। हाँ।
लेकिन बचत राज्यों में जंगल नहीं है।
जी।
तो ये सारा दबाव केवल इन्हीं राज्यों पे क्यों?
अच्छा।
जो कार्बन उत्सर्जन कर रहे हैं, जो टेम्परेचर बढ़ा रहे हैं,
जी।
उन राज्यों में क्यों नहीं होना चाहिए?
हम्म।
और ये जो राज्य जो आपको ऑक्सीजन दे रहा है
हम्म।
उसकी क्या कीमत दे रहे हैं? हम केवल कीमत चुका रहे हैं।
जी।
छत्तीसगढ़, उड़ीसा, झारखंड, मध्य प्रदेश जैसे राज्य केवल कीमत चुका रहे हैं।
जी।
हमको ये आधुनिक समाज दे क्या रहा है? हमारे ये आदिवासी वैसी वैसी हैं,
हाँ।
उनका जीवन स्तर में क्या बदलाव आया है?
हाँ।
और आपके लिए ऑक्सीजन भी दे रहे हैं, आपके लिए कोयला भी दे रहे हैं, आपके लिए आयरन भी दे रहे हैं,
हाँ।
सारा चीज निर्माण करने के लिए और प्रदूषण फैलाने के लिए सब कुछ आपको दे रहे हैं,
हाँ।
और भुगतान हम कीमत हम लोग चुका रहे हैं।
अच्छा, एक और जो क्लाइमेट चेंज में एक कॉन्वर्सेशन जो चलता है, वो है इंडिजिनस पीपल, जो कि मूल निवासी हैं, और जो हमारे छत्तीसगढ़ के संदर्भ में जो जनजाति हैं और मूल निवासी जो लोग हैं वहाँ के, उनका जो है सो उनका लाइफ इम्प्रूव हो, उनको क्लाइमेट एक्शन के कारण कोई और ज्यादा परेशानी ना हो, और उनके जो अभी का जो लाइफ है उसमें इम्प्रूवमेंट की जा सके। तो उस संदर्भ में छत्तीसगढ़ में क्या कदम उठाए जा रहे हैं?
इस सवाल के लिए मैं आपको विशेष रूप से धन्यवाद दूंगा। बहुत अच्छा सवाल पूछा आपने। जब मैं मुख्यमंत्री बना, अधिकारियों की बैठक मैंने ली, तो मैंने पूछा कि डीएमएफ फंड जो है, डिस्ट्रिक्ट मिनरल फंड, और पिछले कुछ वर्षों से चल रहा है, और तो इसके वहां के आदिवासियों के जीवन में आपने इतने 100 करोड़ रुपए खर्चा कर दिया, उसके जीवन में क्या परिवर्तन आया? सारे कलेक्टर थे, सारे अधिकारी थे, तो उन्होंने कहा था कोई परिवर्तन नहीं आया। तो कोई परिवर्तन नहीं आया, तो जितना आप काम कर रहे हैं, जिस तरीके से काम कर रहे हैं, उसको बंद कर दीजिए। मुझे तो चाहिए उसके जीवन में परिवर्तन आए, उसके जीवन में बदलाव आए, उसे शिक्षा में, स्वास्थ्य में, रोजगार में, यातायात, और उसकी संस्कृति बची रहे।
भूपेश जी, मैं आखिरी सवाल आपसे पूछूंगा। ये जब हम ग्लोबल लेवल पे देखते हैं तो क्लाइमेट चेंज जो है सो एक बहुत बड़ा मुद्दा है, और हर जगह इस पे कॉन्वर्सेशन होता है, हर जगह ये चर्चा में होता है। चाहे वो अभी जो G20 की बैठकें चल रही हैं उसमें, UN के हर मीटिंग में, G7 की मीटिंग में, या कहीं भी देखते हैं तो क्लाइमेट चेंज पे सबसे ज्यादा चर्चा। लेकिन जो वहां पे जो चर्चा होती है उसका एक्चुअल जो क्रियान्वयन, जो एक्शन प्लान बनना है, उसका जो काम होना है वो तो राज्यों में होना है ना?
हाँ,
तो उसका काम तो एक्चुअली राज्यों में होना है। तो जब मैं ये जानना चाह रहा था कि क्या राज्यों में भी जब आप जो है सो कोई नीति बनाते हैं या किसी तरह का जो कार्यक्रम आप जब शुरू करते हैं, तो क्या क्लाइमेट चेंज आपके लिए अभी सबसे बड़ी समस्या है? क्या आप जब कोई भी कार्यक्रम बनाते हैं तो ये सुनिश्चित करने की कोशिश करते हैं कि ये जो है ये क्लाइमेट पॉजिटिव हो, क्लाइमेट नेगेटिव ना हो, जो क्लाइमेट ऑब्जेक्टिव्स हैं उसके साथ साथ ये भी कार्यक्रम चले? तो इस तरह का मतलब प्रायोरिटी में क्या राज्यों में क्लाइमेट चेंज नंबर 1 प्रायोरिटी है अभी?
देखिए, इसको तो हमने चुनावी मुद्दा बनाया था
जी
हमने नारा दिया था, छत्तीसगढ़ के 4 चिन्हारी, नरवा, गरवा, घुरवा वाली।
जी।
तो ये नरवा से जो नाला, जो वाटर रिचार्जिंग काम कर रहे हैं, गरवा मतलब ये जो पशुधन है, और ये कार्बन उत्सर्जन जो हो रहा है उसे रोकने के लिए, जो पराली जला रहे हैं उसे रोकने का काम, और घुरवा मतलब जितना वेस्ट मटेरियल है उसके हम चाहे बिजली उत्पादन करें, चाहे खाद बनाएं, उसका करें। बाड़ी मतलब हर घर में ये बाड़ी होना चाहिए, तो हरियाली भी होगी और हरा सब्जी भी मिलना है। तो जो यूनाइटेड नेशन ने जो गोल्स तय किए हैं, उसमें मैक्सिमम जो गोल्स हैं हम छत्तीसगढ़ में इंप्लीमेंट कर रहे हैं।
That was a great conversation. Many thanks to the Chief Minister and to Amitabh. We will now have the panel discussion, which will be moderated by Rinku Ghosh, Editor, Special Projects, The Indian Express. May I request Rinku to please share the introductory note with us and also to introduce the panel.
Well, thank you, Pooja, for the lovely introduction. And so we begin our panel discussion today with a brief outline of what we are talking about today. So by all estimates, agriculture has been the hardest hit by climate change. That has had a cascading impact on our crop yields, soil erosion, food security, and equity. So what do we need? We need a climate smart or a climate resilient approach. It's not enough to do just climate mitigation practices, but to make them actionable on the ground, they have to make sense to the people. How can we do that? Do we develop water resistant crops? Can we use technology to better soil quality? Can we do multiple cropping? Can we promote indigenous produce of the land, the native produce of the land? Can we find markets for them? And can we incentivize, most importantly, livelihoods? Most Indian states are taking the lead in shaping and implementing climate change policies, involving local communities and creating sustainable micro-economies around them. Chhattisgarh has been one of the first states to do so, in fact, with the State Climate Action Plan, and has implemented these policies on the ground more than anybody. But then it is also a state where the rural population depends on agriculture a lot. About 80% of the population depends on agriculture. Unfortunately, the dependence is mostly on rain-fed crops and monocropping. So this section is most vulnerable to the impact of climate change on the agricultural economy. That is why we have chosen Chhattisgarh as the focus state to launch this series of I Think dialogues on climate change and the green economy. So we have I'm proud to have an extremely representative panel for this. I have Dr. B. Dayakar Rao. He is CEO, NutriHub, IIMR. I have Dr. Kiran K. Sharma. He is the Director, Sustainable Agriculture from TERI. Welcome, sir. I have Akash Badave, founder and CEO, Bhoomgadi, working closely on the ground, and Rajneesh Awasthi, President, Chhattisgarh Agricon Committee. Welcome all of you to this evening's discussion. So I will begin with Dr. Rao, because I believe he has a series of meetings to attend. So, we are beginning with Chhattisgarh, of course, but what should be the ideal model of a green economy whereby we can tie in with generating incomes for the local communities and ensure sustainable livelihood? What kind of associations can be worked on between the government and private parties on this? What are the energy efficient practices? If you can give us a holistic picture on that, Dr. Rao.
Oh, that's thank you, Madam. I think a Chhattisgarh model of green economy, it has definitely set up policies and initiatives being pioneering in this area that are designed to promote sustainable agriculture development in the state. So, of course, there are several key areas, including the climate adaptation. The state is working to adopt the effects of climate change, such as droughts and floods. This includes measures such as creating man-made forests. That's a very important tribal state taking the lead, promoting the use of water-efficient irrigation techniques. So, and building flood control structures. These are all very important for an economy to take forward, because in earlier cases that people have not have been a climate inclusive policy, I think, but slowly the states are coming up with a little more specialization in trying to think and how this can be mitigated. So, but as you said rightly in the beginning, definitely the water efficient crops are very, very vital to this thing. And you know that the type of land that is primarily available for cultivation, which surpasses especially the tribal population in hills and other tribal areas all pop. So I take the case of something like crop or water efficient crops like millets in tandem with the other pulse crops, wherein the total economy that can bring in value to the the stakeholders is going to be a vital contribution. So I think rediscovering these crops and putting them their due place in the food security as well as the nutritional security is a very vital thing. So in terms of bringing an awareness and also incentivizing them in such a way that the holistic policy of developing the local value chains makes a lot of sense. For example, this millets takes about 300 to 400 millimeters of water, vis-a-vis that of the water draining crops like maize or rice, 1200 mm. And if you want to talk about sugar cane, which is again 2100 mm. So in fact, this country is now we cannot afford, because of the water has become an extremely critical resource for us to take things forward. So how you are going to conserve it and how you are going to really just enable the agro ecosystem in such a way balanced both in terms of draining of resources and make it more sustainable for the future. So taking this choice of the crop is going to be very vital. So I feel that millets are going to be staple, and fortunately, this International Year of Millets, they have a very clear-cut policy as a state government trying to promote millets. I was there in Chhattisgarh, and we have signed an MOU as Indian Institute of Millet Research, and we are hand-holding. So there is some definitely the backward linkages are needed to bring in the aggregation part and then trying to take those crops and create this markets for those people, especially the tribal, for their livelihood systems to be improved, and take it and also try to address that migration, rural migration, youth can be, because the farm gate value addition could be one another important avenue where we can provide an employment to them, a gainful employment, and then make it a little more resilient. I think a reverse thing could happen if the government is going to continue their policy in the days to come. So I would look into this as a very major change, because the type of the things that are there currently is conducive to take that. It is little more, but what we call Koda and Kutki, they are the small millet cultivation, and especially with the plenty of forests which are inhabited by diverse tribal groups. So they are cultivating millets like Kodo, Kutki since ages. So this has resulted in promotion of millets by the state through a special approach, this integrated value chain approach in collaboration with all the credible institutes, so that they can be given a technical backstopping. Here the stakeholder mix makes a lot of difference in trying to address these issues, because building up a value chain has to be again a sustainable thing, and it can be a leader in the country to take those things. And the procurement systems that which people are building up right now, because this state has initiated, is a very Herculean task, because this tribal cultivation are was placed in different parts of the country, procuring them and providing a proper standards and bringing in a real credible system, so that the market assurance is provided to them, so that the increased cultivation that can happen. So the policy is in place. That's what I'm seeing. And going forward, there are some forward integration. They have a policy of establishing some sort of a processing plants in district level. At district level, like Dantewada, they are also taking up. I think Akash will be having little more details on this thing, but we are providing technical collaboration, trying to give all that input and create some sort of a branding image. See, I think Dantewada is one such area I visited, and I'm particularly impressed about the work that is being done in various fronts, especially making these people, rural tribal people, with a focus on the branding image, because they have a Donex and other brands that in textiles they have proved, but in agriculture also they are getting into that. So all these factors would take the sustainable agriculture more pronounced, and this organic farming is another area where, because we are trying to emphasize more and more use of biofertilizers. This includes measures such as capacity building to the farmers on sustainable farming practices and providing subsidies for the purchase of biofertilizers. So to just conclude, the Chhattisgarh model of green economy has been praised by the number of organizations, including the World Bank also, Niti Aayog and United Nations Environment Program. So this model has been created with helping to reduce the state's carbon emissions and improve its energy efficiency and promote sustainable agriculture.
Well, thank you, Dr. Rao. I'll come back to you later with other questions on innovation and technology and how they work at the grassroots. But let me just now go over to Dr. Kiran Sharma of TERI. You heard Dr. Rao. Building a climate resilient model which makes sense at the ground level has its own challenges, but at the same time, it also holds an opportunity for creating, future-proof models. So what's the best way for managing natural resources, and how can we, look at newer ways of getting the community involved in them and invested in them? Sir, you're on mute.
So thank you very much, I think, for the question, and thank Dr. Dayakar Rao for giving that background. I would actually start with agriculture and economic sustainability to start with. Especially, we have declining per capita availability of land, which also reflects shorter transitioning seasons replaced by characteristically hot and dry climates, which are hot and wet. There's also a stagnating agricultural productivity for various reasons. Either it's because of the biotic stresses or abiotic stresses, climatic vagaries. There's also an issue of rapid urbanization and rising of industrial belt. And of course, persistent malnutrition is always around. And there's several unrealized agricultural potentials. For example, there's less than 5% sustainable agricultural land in production areas so far. Only 4% land in production, especially, is irrigated. There's a low fertilizer use, high depletion of soil nutrients, and agricultural productivity is at 25% of the global average. So that needs actually a lot of intervention points, especially reducing need for external inputs. So how do you make the agriculture more sustainable or regeneratable? We call it conservation of soil and water, so that they can be better used, whether it's through diversification of crops, improved food distribution systems, so that there's less wastage around. Because there's almost anywhere from 20 to 40% wastage which happens. So we need the crop strategies, improvement strategies that can integrate the best of conventional and modern technologies to optimize crop productivity. These are some of the major challenges which we find, because the agriculture in these areas is unpredictable and risky business of all the other businesses. As I mentioned, there's small and marginal land holding sizes, which perpetuates a low productivity, and hence there's a low livelihood returns. So what we need is a efficient agricultural production to meet the population demands, increasing pressure on systems, especially for climate change, soil and biodiversity. There's a low level of mechanization at the moment, which needs to be addressed, and of course, value addition and processing, because that's where all the value of the crop remains, because there is no secondary, primary processing or secondary processing centers. A lot of it actually stems from lack of proper market insights, and multiple layers of actors in the value chain, but they all are disconnected. So there's a need to address these emerging food demands, especially for habitats. So what we are trying to do here is develop tools and technologies, especially for sustainable agriculture, environment, and of course, bioenergy for improving crop yields and reducing the carbon footprint. Right now, I think that's one of our major goals is how do we make the economy circular so that the carbon footprint or greenhouse gas emissions can be addressed, improving soil and plant health for sustainable agriculture and the environment. Some of the areas what we are looking at in TERI is use of nano-biotechnology, especially for crop addressing some of the issues here.
So sorry to interrupt, but can you just explain this in layman's terms, how the nano-biotechnology works with an example that would help?
So yeah, I'm coming to that, because nanotechnology has many uses, and more uses are emerging. They find excellent venues, especially in human health as a drug delivery vehicles. But in the case of agriculture, what we are trying to do here is use biological processes to produce nanoparticles, nanofertilizers, especially. We're talking about nano urea, nano DAP. What you're doing is reducing the size of the particles to an extent that there's a maximum absorption by the plant. So when you're doing broadcasting of fertilizers like urea, the plant absorbs only 20% or so. The rest of it either goes into the soil and creates a crust, or it actually goes sideways and goes into the rivers and pollutes the rivers, make them acidified. So with the nanotechnology, which the government is also promoting these days, we are at the experimental stage. For example, we are not going to replace urea 100%, but replace it by 40%. So that itself, not only helps the agriculture, realize better values, but it's also the cost of production of these, macro urea and DAP. There's a lot of energy involved in that. There's a lot of transportation costs. So that's where the nanotechnology actually in agriculture fits very well. We are talking of, as I said, nano urea, nano DAP. So it can be reduced at least 20 to 30% of the use of regular urea or DAP, and see what benefits it brings about. At TERI, we are studying, how does this affect the greenhouse gas emissions, for example, by studying on the field, what type of gases are emitted, how much reduction we can address. The second sustainable practice is use of mycorrhiza biofertilizers. Mycorrhiza is something which is very natural, which was always present in the soil, but somehow because of our monoculture practices or aggressive use of chemicals in agriculture, we have actually destroyed the mycorrhiza. Mycorrhiza is a type of beneficial fungus which forms a symbiotic relationship with the plant roots, and hence extends the reach of the plant roots by several fold. So it's doing two things. One is helping the plants acquire more water from the soils because the reach is increased. Second, it forms a symbiotic relationship with the plant roots, and actually just by taking some nutrition from the plant in the form of sugars, it actually provides water and other nutrients from the soil to the plant. So that's again a sustainable agriculture. And by some estimate, a mycorrhiza can actually sequester almost 40 to 50% of the carbon because it stays in the soil. So we are hoping that by having this practice for 5 to 10 years, you would actually capture sufficient carbon in the soil itself, besides improving the soil yields. So this is how you bring in some resilient, agricultural practices, besides looking at resilient crops, which can tolerate better the environmental stresses or the biotic stresses like fungi or bacteria and other things. So you need to bring better crops and also add better nutritional traits into the crop so that they're not addressing only the caloric value, but also enhancing the what we call the hidden hunger, which is because of the low nutrient levels in most of the foods. Reclamation of wastelands is another one. I think using some of these practices and can we provide disease-free planting material, especially for ornamentals, horticulture, floriculture, which can actually add livelihood options to our populations, especially women. So I'll stop here, but maybe I can come back to...
I'll come back to you with more interesting questions, because what you shed light on was not only interesting, but actually practically possible, and practically possible more so at the grassroots level, which is what we are trying to find solutions for. So I'll just go over to Rajneesh Avasthi. Are you there, sir? Rajneesh?
Yes.
Yes. So, Chhattisgarh, you are the president of Chhattisgarh Agricon Committee, and you have actually worked with the International Rice Research Institute in Manila to develop sturdier varieties of rice. So tell me, and Chhattisgarh, we know, is a rice-heavy state. So what are the challenges what have been the challenges in rice cultivation, and how can you make them climate resilient, and do you need to do, what is the model that you're following at the grassroots?
Okay, first of all, what you were talking about, some of the pain of Chhattisgarh, that it's a mostly watershed, rain-fed area.
No, rain-fed crops.
Yeah, rain-fed crops. Right. So in terms of ecology, it's not it's something a boon. Like we are still not taking out a lot of groundwater from the soil and then just putting it to rice. And topography, you must understand the topography of Chhattisgarh. Chhattisgarh, when you see Chhattisgarh as a whole, it's got three different kind of topography. One is on a hill, where Akash, and another on a plain, and where Akash is staying in a plateau. So we had to have the three different kind of strategy for all these three farmers. The people who are staying into plain area, they do not have much choice because we have rainfall of something like 1,000 to 1,200 mm of rainfall within a small time gap of 65 to 70 days. So paddy was the only option for them, and it is still one of the biggest option. But through Agricon, what we were trying to do is to make those crops, because looking at the vagaries of the nature nowadays, the rainfall, sometimes very short rainfall, sometimes very heavy rainfall, sometimes when what we are getting it, land's getting eroded because of the heavy rainfall. So we were working on not only one seed part. So seed part was one of the things where we have chosen the different varieties, right from the shorter duration to very long duration. Like we start with a long duration if everything is normal in terms of the rainfall and climatic condition. Unfortunately, whenever it happens that because of the undue delay into rainfall, like what's happening this year also. So we other option than growing the paddy. So we were working on a different kind of different adoption of technologies. Like we have done a good job in terms of the systemic intensification system, which is called as also one of the so where we don't have we have a regular flooding and drying period of the cropping system, and it gives you much better crop than the normal crop. Normally, whatever traditionally was being done. So another thing what we have done is we have started promoting a lot of organic manure along with some part of the fertilizer. So we're trying to reduce at least 20 to 30% of the chemical fertilizer input and trying to replace it without even playing with the productivity part. We're trying to replace it with a lot of other biological inputs as well as the composting at the farm level itself. You see, it's so very difficult in terms of the reach. Somebody to make the compost at some other one particular place and bringing it to the farm level, that to that particular time with the shortage of the people, shortage of the time, everything is there. So we are trying to do this on-farm composting kind of system. So these are some of the strategies we have taken. And now we are regularly monitoring on a basis of through the different, we are using different technologies to see what kind of temperature, what kind of soil erosion is happening. And just after the paddy, because biggest problem for the Chhattisgarh was not the only paddy production. The biggest another problem was there because we were mostly depending on rainfall system, and there was no second crop. So we are so areas which we have taken now, where earlier productivity was 120%, so something like 100% on a crop one on a paddy crop. So we have and 20% on a second crop. So we have increased this area almost to 170%, where we increased the secondary crops, like uses of very special crops like psyllium, like ashwagandha, which have requirement of very low water requirement and gives a perfect crop for the farmer. So what sustainability model for us is sustainable economically as well, sustainability for the nature, sustainability for the society. So we are looking at all these three triangle when we are talking about the sustainability aspects of cultivation or agriculture.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Avasti. I'll come back to you with another round of questions. But before that, let me go over to Akash Badwe of Boomgadi. Now, Akash, I know that you're working on the ground on organic produce, but the more interesting part is you have pivoted this movement around women, the women tribal farmers. So, and it is very important in these societies to get the women involved and generate livelihoods, and especially for the preservation of tribal societies as they are. So can you give me some on-ground experiences and tell me how, the organic, there are challenges of scaling organic produce. So how have you been able to make it a sustainable business, A, and B, how have you been able to make women, more and more tribal women, stakeholders in this process? So take us through this.
Right. So just to create a little fact, we work both with women and men farmers, and we believe that that is the key, because both the genders have to be involved in the process. Chhattisgarh being tribal, and especially the areas that we work in, being tribal dominated, a lot of decision powers are where they lie with women primarily, right? There is a great amount of say for women as to what kind of crops are to be cultivated, the way they are to be cultivated. So their involvement is very much important. So our experience has been, now that we're talking about climate resilience and sustainability, one of the ways to address these issues is also to, as we are looking ahead, is also to look back, right? So in the sense that to go into the community and try to understand what kind of practices that the communities and farmers have been following since ages, or in fact since generations, especially tribal communities for that sake, which involves great amount of intricate knowledge about their surrounding ecosystem, right? The way the weather is going to behave, the kind of crops they will choose, and the kind of varieties they will decide to cultivate, or in fact the kind of cultivation practices that they will follow based on the kind of weather patterns which are coming up, right? So there is great amount of traditional knowledge among the community, and that is what we do always as a starting point, is to understand that, to document that, and to work that as a base to build up something like that. So whenever we interact with the farmers, हम लोग ये कहते हैं कि हमको 200 साल की खेती करनी है, right? So where we learn from what our previous generations have been doing, and then what we are doing is for our coming generations. So इसीलिए 200 साल की खेती, and I think that is something the women especially really tap into, because they are in fact more connected to the children, more connected to the welfare of the family, and that is how they connect with this. Second thing is, I think the tribal areas, not just areas like Dantewada where I'm working, many of the tribal areas have been such where very low amounts of chemical fertilizers are being used, right? And these areas can be, low-hanging fruits for us to start with promotion of organic farming activities, where the ecosystem compared to intensive agricultural areas is not that much disrupted; it is still preserved, and that can give us an easy ground to start promoting organic farming practices, and that is what we have done. Just to share, in fact, when we started working in Dantewada, the per hectare chemical fertilizer usage in Dantewada was around 10 to 15 kilos per hectare, whereas the national average was around 135 kilos per hectare. That shows the difference. And then over the period of work of around 7-8 years, now we have been able to, almost bring it to nil, right? So Dantewada is one district where no government agency is promoting chemical inputs or even distributing. And there are around 110 villages completely, organic. So I think that can be a starting point to, start promoting organic agricultural activities. And that can be a very important aspect in terms of climate resilience. But the another thing I wanted to talk about is when we are thinking about resilient agriculture or resilient crops, I think just resilient crops or agriculture is not going to be sufficient, right? We need to think about, in fact, resilient ecosystems, right? And these ecosystems, the climate change is not going to happen or impact the same way to all the areas equally, right? It is going to behave differently in different areas. So each micro agroclimatic conditions are going to be different, right? And in that sense, the farmers have developed great amount of traditional varieties and crops adopted to different, scenarios and different conditions. I think conserving them, building upon them, trying to connect, seed systems, so that they have access to good seeds of such traditional crops, and then helping also to connect them to the market, so that there is niche and new markets created for such traditional crops. I think is going to help greatly in terms of strengthening the livelihood in coming times.
Okay. Well, thank you, Akash. I'll take you up more on grassroots issues that come up while transitioning to such policies, and that is why, how the question of integrating native logic with technology, or what we think is right, that intersection has to happen seamlessly. Dr. Rao, may I come back to you? Dr. Rao, are you there? So I have two questions for you, quick questions. One is, what is the research and development that you're doing on seed quality, or on, making robust varieties of existing crops? One is the research part. And the second part is the marketing, which you mentioned, of course, in your introductory remarks. But, marketing, what is the marketing mechanism that NutriHub is following at the moment, and what needs to be done? What are the gaps, if there are any? What are the high points, if there are any? And how can that become a template?
Oh, I think that's a very interesting question that you posed. So the first part of it is that how we can really just make this crop, especially because when you talk about some of these traditional crops, I'll answer the second question first and then come back.
Okay.
So, see, it's not the supply that is a constraint, but the demand is the constraint. So, making these traditional crops, that more commercial color to them, that is a very big challenge that which we are facing today. Primarily, if you want to bring them back, there should be an USP. What is the unique selling proposition that they should be brought back? Of course, for us, it's the farmer who is the primary stakeholder who should be able to be benefited by the entire process. But while doing so, the emerging food systems that can make it more sustainable is a very big challenge, because we try to connect when you're talking about climate resilience, but at the macro level scenario, the nutritional security, such issues are also very vital for us. Even as we see that the entire macronutritional programs, all they could not cater even to eliminate the anemia and other things. So now what happened is that urban people have discontinued certain food practices, and that is what we see, the malady of malnutrition and all other subsequently, because the nutrition science says that you need to diversify diet. Increasingly, after the independent India took over green revolution, it was the rice and wheat based system. Even through the public system, distribution system, we were just promoting it. But today, there has to be a paradigm shift, because you see that India has been, or the states governments were, with the increased rice consumption and all those things, lifestyle diseases are prowling like anything, with some higher CAGR levels that is making now today this becoming see, even if the micro level families, for them the amount of their incomes that are spent on an annual basis is about 30% of their total income on the health and wellness. Given this premise, I think what we did is that create a demand and supply. But while doing so, we have the background information that how rice and wheat have been brought into this country, and excessive polishing and the nutritional, how we missed out through the excessive processing and then trying to take it to the common man and all this. So now initially that it is the consumption of these traditional grains or the products have been reduced. So, but today there is an increased need for, even in the rural systems also, the food systems that has to be discovered again, and with a high nutritional profile and all this. So the nutrition sciences, you need to diversify diet and bring them and all. So under this NutriHub system, what we did is that we try to identify the gaps that are there, especially in creating demand for that. So one, definitely giving a commercial color to the cultivation, how that there is a money that is involved in that, how the farmers can. With the help of ITC, we have brought out some sort of models where the aggregation, collectivization, and leading into the farmers producer organization, which can have a collective bargaining capacity. Otherwise, the millets do not have so, because it is consumed by the farmers, grown by themselves for their sake. But today they'll have to grow for your sake and my sake. So
Yeah.
how to bring this was the transition that was the challenge that was there. Processing is very, very vital thing. There was a technology that has to be tweaked in trying to just manipulating the protein instead, manipulating the starch instead of protein, because these are gluten free, and bring in that processing technologies with the machinery in place and trying to bring on par with the wheat and rice. Otherwise, you are offering only what is the chapati wheat and all this, just like that wheat chapati, jawar chapati, but highly inconvenient. So bringing convenience into the system and giving consumer options, various options, that was a very vital contribution that the Indian Institute of Millet Research has contributed and is piloted and scaled up also. Now it is being replicated in across the country and all those things. So this is what NutriHub, but the last mile connectivity was every institute can come up to this level of making machinery, doing all those things, putting technology in place, but bringing into the last mile connectivity where you can take it. In fact, we have registered a brand called Eat Right, the first brand in millets, and that was an instant success. But that is not our foray. We don't want to get into too much of that. We were successful, but you need to diversify yourself into in such a way where the technology flow is there and trying to see that the scaling up of the millet value chain. Because here this particular conversion of a domestic crop to a conversion, we had a big opportunity as an institute, and we have a good partners like ICRISAT and others. So we were just slowly building up the consortium around that and trying to build the startup ecosystem. So when they saw the new products that are coming, which has a USP nutrition, there was an increased thing. Now 400 plus startups are being now handheld by that with 360-degree. Now we have gone to the extent of providing some seed capital and also pre-incubation funds also. So that we see it's become a very resilient and more countries very now. Just now I am about to submit a proposal. Can we replicate this model across the country? So to DST, we have put up a thing, NutriHub West, NutriHub North, NutriHub South, and NutriHub East to begin with. There are some interests that are happening that how these sustainable models can also be replicated in some African nations like Egypt. They want to have a similar thing. But even all these things, until and unless the producer share in the consumer rupee can go to the for dryland farmers and tribal people, I think then the whole effort will be fizzled out. So I think the entire value chain gains that which we are had has to happen and go percolated deep down to the farmers level, so that they get enough share for them to become an incentive to increase the area under these cultivation and all this, and give a proper management to that and get some good livelihood gains also. And they is to start, because one point I just want to tell you that how they discover millets back into their plate. This is what is the biggest challenge in the tribal. Now, sometimes it so happens that they try to buy from the PDS, some of the systems, and they go and sell it outside in the market. They get a good price outside, but they don't, now they are considering this is not our cup of tea. So how that literacy, that capacity building that can made them to understand. I think there is one demonstration effect, what we call in economics. What it says is that the poor tend to imitate the rich. So what we see is today that the technology that is there through the media and all those things, when they see Amitabh Bachchan, Prime Minister, talking about millets, people, it becomes from percolating from urban to the rural areas. So they realize the importance of the nutrition and take this thing. And these commercial ventures, if they can be connected with the larger industry which are coming now, Pepsi, all those things, and the export market, we connect it, the value chain is going to be really just going to become robust. But it's a big challenge, I know, but we are on the path. International Year of Millets is on, but it's 1 year, nothing can be done when 60 years of negligence of this thing. But there is, we are putting on the track with all the stakeholders in place. I think this will take us a long way.
Dr. Rao. So now let me go over to Dr. Kiran Sharma. Dr. Sharma, you heard Dr. Rao also, and you know, markets are a very important part for any sustainable economy to continue, you know, and considering Chhattisgarh, which is largely tribal oriented. how can we make, I know Terry works on this area, how to create effective market linkages?
So I think it's a very important question on, how do you move from farm gate to the consumer? A mention was made about market demand, market pull. So especially in the case of when you're talking millets, you need to create a market pull because these are not naturally occurring food, and usually they were considered as poor man's food. But we know they're not actually. They're not orphan crops. They're very important crops. It's just they're just left behind. But there are certain reasons why these crops are not consumed. If you look at pearl millet or bajra, for example, its keeping quality is not long. Rancidity comes in. The moment you make flour out of it, rancidity sets in. So if you make any products out of it, they go bad very fast. There's a darkening, and then there's off smell, off flavor. So that's one of the reasons I think some of the research we're doing is on how to get rid of this rancidity problem in pearl millet so that
Dr.
it can be easily consumed.
Can you hear that? Yeah.
Right? So to do that, I think you need to link the farmer with the market. There's a whole value chain I think we need to study, right from the input supply, what are the pre-production areas, productions, post-harvest processing, especially the primary processing and secondary processing of this produce, storage, trading. How do you process the food, especially for ready-to-eat segment or ready-to-cook type of segment, and moving downwards to retail. Now, Dr. Dayakar also mentioned about the startup ecosystem, and I think that's a very, very powerful tool where India has embarked on business incubation programs where the village youth, especially women, can be provided training as a startups. Now, the advantage of startup is they're not looking for jobs. They actually are creating jobs for them. They create one job and then at least hire 5 to 10 people more. So they created actually 10 jobs just in a rural livelihood option. So we need to, I think, strengthen that ecosystem more so that these business incubators, Nutri Hub concept was talked about. So these eventually will actually start contributing to strengthening of that value chain itself, which right now it's broken. So we need to study what are the components of this value chain, where the value chain actually breaks, whether it's in the inputs or output markets, and then strengthen it further. We need to have education to the farming community, especially in Chhattisgarh, where primarily backward and tribals are more, and majority of them seem uneducated, I think. So I think special training programs for them so that the traditional agricultural practices can be replaced with some modern technologies, hybrids, natural farming technologies can be brought in. We can help them in diversifying the farming system, especially encourage farmers to diversify the crops, especially crops and livestock, so that we can reduce the vulnerability to climatic change impacts. Because sometimes the crop fails, sometimes animals fail because water. So it's a vicious circle. So that's where I think the diversification in agricultural value chains becomes very important to bring in mixed farming systems so that we can enhance resilience by spreading risks associated with the climate variability. So we can mitigate the risks in each of the areas, but you need to understand that whole value chain. So we need to invest in climate smart technology, especially supporting research and development for climate smart agricultural technologies, such as we can bring in precision farming, things like drip irrigation to minimize water usage, especially in the case of vegetables and horticultural crops, drought resistant crop varieties, which is, I think, all the researchers and plant breeders are looking at how to make more crop per drop type of a concept, and so that these can help us optimize the resource use, minimize environmental impacts, and adapt to climatic change conditions. So strengthening farm education and training becomes very important so that the farmers' knowledge is enhanced on what type of sustainable agricultural practices actually exist. So I'm not a big fan of organizing training camps and all, but I think it needs hand-holding, something what Akash is doing. You need to work with the farmers on a regular basis and, translate some of these well-established sustainable agricultural practices, teaching them how to, do climate change adaptation, how to get the information, and so that some of these strategies, mitigation strategies can be implemented, and thereby empower them to make informed decisions and implement sustainable farming methods. So I think the value chain is important, but we need to study what components of value chain are broken or don't exist, and then try to link them up. And hopefully that will lead to a much more sustainable agriculture. It's not just inputs, but also the outputs, I think, that needs to be taken care of. I'll stop.
Yeah. Well, I'll go over to Akash, taking off from your remarks. Akash, you're working the ground very effectively on this with women, no less. So can you give us a story, a model to illustrate how this model of empowering women worked and how the linkage to the market worked for them? So can you just take us through a story, because that gives us a live example of what can be done, because otherwise it all remains in the realm of discussion and people think it's not possible to implement it, right? So can you share one story with us? And that would be interesting.
Right. So, there are multiple stories, but just to give you an example, there is a village called Bade Kameli in Dantewada, and there is a women farmer called Fulobai, right? And she has been cultivating paddy primarily, right? Using traditional methods, right? And of course, because of that, primarily the farmers use broadcasting technique, which is low in productivity, right? So gradually working with her, we helped her adopt, system of rice intensification, where she can continue using her own traditional seeds. In fact, she can best take decision as to what kind of variety she has to grow, looking at her own field condition. But just change the method of cultivation, right? And over the period of time, she saw there is significant increase in the productivity, right? Whereas earlier the production of paddy for her own family for the overall over year was not sufficient. Over the period of time, that has been surplus, and then she has been able to sell it to the market. Now that is where also the collectivization helped, right? Where initially she used to sell paddy into the open market because she didn't have her own name in the land title, so she was not able to sell it to the government MSP societies, and she had to sell it into the open market, right? So now, because she was also connected to Bhumgadi, she became member of Bhumgadi. She started growing a special medicinal rice variety, right, which had a better market demand compared to the other varieties that she was growing. And this variety was also an indigenous variety, well adapted to the environment. She could earn, per kg better rate compared to the market. So, whereas the market offers 10 to 12 rupees per kg for paddy, she was able to get somewhere between 20 to 21 rupees per kg, right? That is a significant improvement. So, and this variety is more climate resilient, it needs lesser water and things like that. Similarly, initially she used to cultivate on smaller patch vegetables for her own family needs, seasonally, couple of times in a year. Gradually, as we worked with her, and there was some amount of pesticide use that was happening, over the period of time, she learned various techniques of organic farming. She stopped using chemical pesticides, and now she sells those vegetables apart from satisfying her own need, but also in the open market, and had been able to earn around 30 to 40,000 rupees of additional income per year. Right? So this is just one example, and that can give some hope as to if we work. And in all of this process, there was a again woman community resource person called Kavita, continuously giving her handholding support, and like her, many other women in her own village, right? So this is one example, as to how if we can give a continuous handholding support to women farmers, uh, combining their own traditional knowledge with new, modern sustainable techniques, can help them become more climate resilient as well as, strengthen their livelihood.
Okay. Thank you, Akash. So I'll go over to Rajneesh. Mr. Avasthi, are you there? Yeah. Yeah. If you, yeah, unmute yourself. So I'm going to ask you about two things. And being a grassroots person, I think you'll be able to shed light on this. There is a lot of mining happening in Chhattisgarh. Okay. So,
Yes.
how do we keep mining sustainable and not tax the environment? That's a big challenge and a big ask. But since you work at the grassroots level, how does that happen? And B, how do we maximize the production of ethanol from sugarcane juice than molasses? Can we create a biofuel reserve? Considering Chhattisgarh has had some headway in this department. So if you can take us to these 2 points quickly.
On a first thing, ma'am, as far as the mining and environment is concerned, we are talking the two different North Pole and South Pole.
Yeah, that is
That's
why I
because
asked. And that is the challenge.
that's one of the two things.
We
But
cannot escape that.
but my opinion is that if mining companies and the government, if they work out reasonably well into the criteria which has already been given, if they work responsibly with the nature what has been supposed to be done, it is not that mining is also a need, and we need to fulfill that part of the demand also apart from food. So, but what's happening? Like as soon as the mining leaves and things get sanctioned, people unruly start working on it, and they collapse the entire system. The system is there, proper rehabilitation with the people, and it is not particularly in Chhattisgarh. We have no lack of land over there. There are thousands and thousands of hectares. Even Akash can vouch for it, which are in the lack of because of the lack of the resources, because of the lack of the irrigation system, the different roads or connectivity, whatever it is, which is lying vacant and which is lying fallow. So can't we use this the wealth which we are creating out of the mining, some part which can go directly and we can start cultivating it into a better resource system. And when we are disposing it off, it, that is not mining is not the only problem. My problem comes even after the mining. The waste which comes out, like typically case of aluminum mining, if you say, bauxite mining, the post removal of the bauxite, the kind of system, kind of the wastage which comes out of it, even that is not being disposed very proper manner. The people just a very high pH, very low pH kind of soil, which goes down the drain, and the entire river, which we call it the Indravati River, which is the heart of the Chhattisgarh, is the color of the water is itself is the red color. So we need to be a responsible citizen and responsible companies before we're doing mining. And instead of making it a conflict, why can't we work in a system which support each other? So if there's a mining lease, it should be very well before the mining is started. You should be having a proper rehabilitation system coming in place. And unless the rehabilitation system and the Gram Panchayat has been taken entirely confidence, those unruly mining systems should not be done. So in fact, because I'm telling it with a great responsibility with me, because of some of those mining systems which are there, some of the minerals which are there. Most of the part of the Chhattisgarh, particularly places like where Dantewada, or you take it the cases of long northern part, they've been kept out of the development process only because the company knows that sometime or other they need to go and then start mining. If there's a development, there's going to be a greater number of the compensation that have to be paid. So they've been kept out of the system itself.
Yeah.
So this is something which I will say to the community, to the government, to the companies, to all the people who are concerned with it. Mining, yes, is a need, but let's not make the do the mining at the cost of environment, cost of the lives of the people, and cost of the kind of wealth which nature has given to us, not to destroy it to the level. So that's one part of it.
And the
On
ethanol.
another part, ma'am, on a ethanol thing, I don't know why we are talking only about the ethanol coming out of the sugarcane or ethanol coming out of rice. So see, the ethanol basically is what? Ethanol is a product which is coming out of the carbohydrate, which is a simple system like carbohydrate which you are getting from the sugarcane, or carbohydrate which you are getting it from the rice. But there are other varieties like a good number of varieties which are there, which are rich in carbohydrate, rich in sugars, which can be converted to that, and which are very, very low water requirement things. Like case of take the case of one special variety of jawar, like one of the millet variety, which is having the almost 19% of the sugar, and that this require almost one-sixth or one-tenth of the water which is required in the sugar cane. So we must look into the policy. Yes, once again, the same thing I say. Yes, ethanol is a requirement, but not at the cost of environment. So ethanol, if it is saving at one place and you are producing too much of the sugarcane just to produce the ethanol, so one side you are repairing the things, another side you are destroying the things. So let's start working on ethanol production from the lot of other resources also. Put a lot of fund for the R&D and technology development. See, as I say, we have a lots of biomass over here, particularly biomass coming out of the paddy, which is called the paddy straw. Now there are technologies, or Ranjam technologies, which can convert paddy straw coming into the level where it can convert it into the glucose level, and glucose can be easily converted to ethanol. This is just one of the examples. There are 100 other ways also where the tannins also can be converted, where the thick other starchy products which are there. The root system, the root vegetables which we call it, which is for which Chhattisgarh is very popular. That's also a very rich source of carbohydrate. These carbohydrates also can be converted into ethanol. So we must look into the system which is more sustainable rather than easier way out. So yeah, this is why it is. But as far as this is concerned, why people are making from the molasses, because molasses is one of the ways. So from where you convert the whatever remaining alcohol, carbohydrate or sugars are there, you convert them to alcohol, and that becomes a kind of value-added product. And because ethanol, recently ethanol has become the things of the discussion here.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that perspective. Okay, now while we have had this very insightful discussion, we've had some questions from the audience come in, and they are to specific people. So I will be addressing first to Dr. Kiran Sharma. There's a question coming up for you, sir. One of our viewers have asked, investment in new technologies related to sustainable agriculture comes at a cost, right? Mm-hmm. What are the ways of financing these technological transitions? And especially, it should make sense to marginalized tribal farmers. Is there a way of funding them? Should there be a funding effort in between? How can this be done, sir?
So this is a very good question, and I think the world is grappling with this question about climate funding, basically, where we know what we need to reduce, but where does the money come from?
Yeah, exactly.
In the past, the government sources were actually investing money, but as we move forward, I think the society has to start paying for it as well. You know, the industry, especially, a mention was made about wastelands, being created by the industry. Industry, I think, as a part of the corporate social responsibility, some of these projects have to be funded, especially on developing new climate resilient strategies. And that's where I think once you start looking at the circular economy, how do you engage the tribals in this whole this cycle, basically? Because there are a lot of products, I think, which are marketed or captured by the tribals, from their natural resources. You need to a way to find, take these out into the marketplace, and that's where I think that entrepreneurship becomes very important. For example, honey from the forests. Now, the tribals would collect the honey and then sell it on the roadside for virtually nothing. But can we organize, make it as an organized producer organization or self-help group where this honey could be collected, bottled in a environmental friendly as well as safety point of view, and then market it. A lot of these initiatives already going on with Organic India and all those things. So we need to cater to specific needs of the tribals. I wouldn't be too interested in changing the lifestyle of the tribals. I think they have a lifestyle. So we need to study that lifestyle and see how, but certainly I think the civil society has to come in and start funding some of this research. The industry has to come in, which has always been a beneficiary of the consumers as well as the agricultural farmers. So they have to come and start supporting some of these initiatives. So that's where the money should come from.
Industry support. Do you get industry support for tribal produce in your research? Are you getting them?
Right now, none or very little. But I think this has to become a routine. There's a lot of money sitting in the corporate social responsibility as mandated by the government. It's 2% of the profits. But I think a lot of it is going probably into areas which make no sense. You start funding more roads and schools and which are not sustained. So I think the corporates should also start looking at the entrepreneurship development programs, invest there, because ultimately that's where the circularity will come in. We were talking about bioethanol and all those things. The research has to continue. Why do we always keep depending that government should come and start funding this? There are other players, venture capitalists. Let them come and invest money in those things. That's my take on it.
Thank you, Dr. Sharma. The next question is for Dr. Dayakar Rao. Dr. Rao, somebody in the audience has asked a very interesting question, and they said, okay, right now there is a lot of talk about millets and there is curiosity, it's a new thing, lots of awareness campaigns, but over time, if the demand shrinks, then how do you sustain a millet mission? So what is your long-term action plan to make sure that millets are just not a passing fad? 2 years down the line, people are not as hot on millets. Then what do you do? So how do you keep it a stable business?
So I think it's a very interesting question. I think people are thinking the other way. If the demand, because the type of the traction that built by the government of India through a lot of campaigning that is happening and continue to happen. And this Prime Minister being himself as a brand ambassador, the situation would not be there, I presume, that the demand would shrink. But let us presume that such a situation would come where the demand would shrink also. So but another reason why I will be more batting for demand would not shrink, because this has got to do with your health. Millets, if they are being discovered, it is primarily because of the health. Otherwise, there is no need why you should bring them back. Definitely, climate resilience is other reason why we are bringing in all this. So all these pointers will take it to such a way, and the solid government policy which is backing now on various fronts and many stakeholders and going at the disaggregated level, things are moving forward. This is what, because I've been working for the past 20 years plus, and I have never seen a situation like this where the things would go. And another reason what I see is that you go to, International Day, which is when it is declared by, India led the promotional activity, that has not stopped with that particular year. Still it is going on and going on. Even gardens of that there is a lot of promotion by the Prime Minister himself. But if demand shrinks, I think the government has to think about one important area, why it is happening and all those things. So I'm sure that if it happens, perhaps the consumer's acceptance must be less. But by and large, if the consumer acceptance is going to be down, because now the industry is coming. Whatever the best part of it is that for rice, wheat, whole of the world has done a lot of research. For millets, none. But now the industry is entering. Pepsi, HUL, Nestle, and all those things. This is going to bring a good taste and the flavor to the millets as an acceptable thing. So, to my sense, it appears that we will not be able to go to a situation, either it may remain stagnant or it may increase. But perhaps there will be a case where the supply might be shortened then and the prices would go up. That could be the reason where people may stop eating at least the lower strata of it. So the government has its policy, there is a captive marketing that is happening. So I think if the industry is not able to take the primary, because to begin with rice and wheat, it is only the captive marketing that has led to the rest of the market. So today the public Poshan Abhiyan and other programs are there. The government has to be very, very resilient in taking this millet promotion in such a way that in all this ICDS program, midday meal program, public distribution system, if they continue to do that, I'm sure the demand won't be shrinking at all.
Okay, so thank you, Dr. Rao. And with that, we come to the end of the panel discussion. We are almost out of time. And thank you for joining me. It was such an illuminating conversation. We had so many perspectives and more so many implementable and practical solutions that can be worked on for future-proofing our agriculture economy amid climate change. So thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Very much.
Enjoyed the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. May I now call upon Ritika Bhattacharya, CEO of Swaniti Initiative, to do the closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Honorable Chief Minister. Thank you to the Indian Express. Thank you, our esteemed panelists, for such a wonderful conversation today. My name is Ritvika Bhattacharya. I am the CEO for Swaniti Initiative. Swaniti Initiative is a social enterprise that provides technical support to district administrations and state governments to enable better delivery of public services. One of our core areas of work is climate and sustainability. And therefore, these tangible conversations around how you create economic value around climate, around sustainability, around agriculture is just that important for us. The very visionary insight of the Chief Minister and the substantive insights on the way forward by panelists and by our moderator was very helpful to folks like us who work in this sector. For that, we're thankful. We're also thankful to the audience for hearing us and your wonderful questions. This is such a great opportunity to think more deeply around issues of climate. And it is great to see such conversations thriving in spaces like the Indian Express. We look forward to many such conversations and we appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. That was very insightful. We would like to thank our partner, Swaniti Initiatives, for helping us put this session together, and also all our speakers and audience present during this session. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.